Hello and welcome to Bible Study 24H, where we bring to life the most moving and sacred stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. Today we invite you to witness a story unlike any other. A story not of crowns or ceremonies, but of a simple, unbreakable bond between a humble man and a forgotten creature. As Pope Francis approached his final days, his last wish was not for grandeur or titles, but for the quiet presence of a stray dog named Esteban, a companion who taught the world what love without conditions truly looks like. This is a journey of silent loyalty, unspoken faith, and a love so pure it broke centuries of tradition, leaving even the mighty walls of the Vatican in tears. If this story touches your heart, please like this video to help spread its beautiful message. Share it with those who need a reminder of what truly matters, and subscribe to Bible Study 24H for more timeless stories of faith, love, and compassion. Now, let's step into the sacred silence of Pope Francis's final days and discover a love that refused to let go. The Vatican had always been a place of immaculate order, a symphony of tradition where every footstep echoed centuries of reverence and control. Within its ancient marble walls, every gesture, every whispered prayer followed a script older than memory itself. But as Pope Francis's days quietly drew to a close, a different kind of stillness took root. It was not the solemn, rehearsed silence of rituals. It was the heavy, aching silence of farewell, the kind of hush that wraps itself around a place when a great soul is preparing to cross over. The stone corridors seemed to breathe slower. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled, not with their usual commanding authority, but with a gentler, almost hesitant voice, as if they too sensed the approaching twilight. Inside the apostolic palace behind doors that had witnessed the passing of ages, Pope Francis lay resting in a modest room far removed from the trappings of power. His breaths, once strong and steady now, came slower, shallower, like the whisper of a candle nearing its final flicker. His hands, the same hands that had blessed millions, embraced the poor and uplifted the broken, now rested motionless atop simple white linens, their every movement growing lighter, as if even the act of holding on was becoming too heavy. Those closest to him moved about with reverent care. The daughters of charity sisters who had long tended to his needs did not bustle. They floated through the halls, their faces marked not by panic, but by a sacred sorrow, as if each step was a prayer. The Swiss guards at their posts, the aides who once bustled with paperwork and schedules, now lingered at corners, heads bowed, speaking only when absolutely necessary. The Vatican, for all its grandeur and centuries of power, had been reduced in these final hours to what it had always truly been: a house of prayer, a sanctuary for the soul preparing to meet its Maker. And Pope Francis, the shepherd who had lived his life walking among the wounded, lifting the forgotten, and breaking open the stiff traditions of men to make way for mercy, prepared for his own final journey, not with fear, but with a tender, unfinished longing in his heart. There was someone still missing from his side. The world outside waited for news, the dignitaries, the politicians, the faithful who would soon crowd St. Peter's Square with candles and prayers. But within these sacred walls, Pope Francis' heart reached not for crowns or counsels, but for a creature who had taught him more about God's unconditional love than many sermons ever could. In the approaching stillness, a final act of love, simple, wordless, profound, was about to unfold. And in that act, the centuries-old Vatican would witness something greater than tradition. It would witness the silent, unstoppable power of presence and the living echo of Eden itself. As the hours slipped quietly through the marble corridors, a deeper kind of urgency stirred within the room where Pope Francis lay. It was not the urgency of unfinished business, not the desperate clinging of a man fearful of death. It was the yearning of a soul who knew the end was near and who longed to complete one last act of love before stepping through the veil. Those who attended him, seasoned in tending both bodies and souls, noticed it. A restlessness beneath the stillness, a soft searching in the way his fading gaze turned again and again toward the open window that looked out onto the gardens beyond gardens, that held not only olive trees and fountains but the memory of countless silent walks and the bond that had healed something deep within him. It was Sister Cecilia, the tender, faithful nun who had been by his side for years, who first heard the whisper. She leaned in to adjust his pillow, careful not to disturb the fragile peace that surrounded him. His lips, dry and pale, moved. She bent closer. "Bring him." He breathed the words so faint they barely existed. She hesitated, her heart thudding in the heavy quiet. "Who, Your Holiness?" she asked, thinking. Perhaps he wished to see a cardinal, a confessor, a brother of faith. But his response was different. A tired smile, soft and sure, broke across his worn face. And then, in a voice barely above a sigh, he said, "Esteban." The name hung in the air, like a prayer. Sister Cecilia's breath caught Esteban, the stray dog, the silent companion who had crept into the Pope's life and heart, not by pedigree or status, but by the simple, stubborn grace of unconditional presence. A creature who in the eyes of the world was nothing, but in the eyes of Pope Francis was everything that mattered. It was a request that defied centuries of protocol. No dog had ever been permitted to walk freely into the inner sanctums of the apostolic palace, let alone to sit vigil by the bed of a dying pope. Tradition dictated dignity, formality, the careful choreography of a holy death surrounded by priests, cardinals, and prayers. But Francis, true to the heart he had always revealed to the world, did not seek grandeur. He sought the quiet companionship of a soul who loved him with no agenda, no expectation, no condition, a soul that had waited patiently under olive trees through seasons of change, content simply to be near. Without hesitation, Sister Cecilia bowed her head, tears filling her eyes. She knew this final wish was not a whim. It was a final sermon, a last living testament to the gospel. Pope Francis had spent his life proclaiming that love in its purest form has no boundaries and no need for permission. And so, with her heart pounding and the walls of tradition trembling around her, she turned and left the room, her simple sandals tapping urgently against the stone. Outside in the garden shadows, a figure stirred as if he had been waiting all along. In the cool hush of the Vatican gardens, where centuries of prayers still clung to the ancient olive trees, Esteban lay curled beneath a low-hanging branch. His once scruffy fur had grown whiter with the passing years, and the limp in his gait, a relic of old wounds, had never fully left him. But on this evening, as the first stars began to shimmer against the indigo sky, something stirred in him, a call beyond sound, beyond reason. He lifted his head, nose twitching toward the direction of the palace, sensing a silent summons carried on the trembling air. Sister Cecilia appeared at the edge of the gardens, her figure framed by the last golden light of sunset. She did not call his name aloud. She didn't need to. Esteban saw her, and somehow he knew, rising slowly to his feet, stiff but determined, he began to move, not with the hesitant, fearful steps of a stray, but with the steady resolve of one who understood his purpose. The Swiss guards stationed at the entrance watched in silent astonishment as Esteban approached. Their expressions, usually carved in disciplined stone, softened as they stepped aside. Without a word, protocol fell away like old leaves on the wind. This was no ordinary visitor, and these were no ordinary circumstances. In the great echoing halls of the Vatican, something ancient was unfolding, a story as old as Eden itself. A love that needed no blessing from human institutions to be considered holy. Esteban's paws clicked softly against the marble floors, the sound almost musical against the deep silence. He walked past frescoes and statues, past the solemn faces of saints, immortalized in stone, carrying with him a presence more alive, more urgent than anything those walls had known in generations. Those who witnessed him pass said later that it felt as though love itself had taken physical form and was quietly making its way to the heart of the church. When he reached the heavy wooden door of Pope Francis's chamber, Esteban paused. He stood there for a long moment. His head bowed slightly, as if recognizing the sacred threshold he was about to cross. Then, with a slow, deliberate step, he entered the room. Inside, the fading light bathed everything in a soft, golden glow. The Pope lay still, his breathing shallow, his face turned toward the door as if he had been waiting for this moment. A gentle smile flickered at the corners of his lips. Esteban approached the bedside, his movements tender and unhurried. Without hesitation, he lay down at the foot of the bed, resting his head gently against the wooden frame, his body forming a living anchor in a world slipping away. There were no words exchanged, no need for them. In the quiet between man and creature, a conversation deeper than language took place. A dialogue of presence of love without conditions of faithfulness unmeasured by time or reward. It was a final silent sacrament between two souls who had found each other not by design but by divine providence. And in that sacred stillness, as the candles flickered and the stars continued their patient watch overhead, the Vatican witnessed something it could never script, never control: a love that transcended doctrine, a loyalty that mocked the boundaries of protocol, a quiet, enduring miracle written not on scrolls or decrees, but etched forever into the living heart of grace. The room where Pope Francis lay was bathed in a hush so profound that it seemed even time itself dared not intrude. Shadows gathered softly along the walls, and the rhythmic flicker of candlelight painted long, trembling shapes across the simple furnishings. It was a room stripped of grandeur, where the heart of a shepherd prepared to beat its last, not in isolation but in the gentle company of a friend who needed no words to speak his love. Esteban curled faithfully at the foot of the bed, lifted his head and gazed at the figure he had loved without expectation. His brown eyes, old and knowing, held a tenderness that no human hand could have carved, no brush could have painted. Slowly, carefully, he rose on tired legs and stepped closer until he was beside the bed, his head resting lightly against the edge where Pope Francis's hand lay motionless but warm. For a long while there was only presence. No speeches, no solemn declarations, only the sacred music of shared breath, the fading beat of a heart, the steady, silent witness of a creature who had found his home in the simplest and purest of ways. By staying, Pope Francis, sensing the nearness of his friend even in the fog of his final moments, shifted ever so slightly. His frail hand moved almost imperceptibly, and his fingers brushed against Esteban's coarse fur. It was not a grasp, not a clinging, merely a touch. A last gesture of connection from a man who had spent his life reaching out to the wounded and the forgotten. In that fleeting contact, something eternal passed between them. A blessing given and received, wordless but complete. A final benediction from a heart that had always known the language of the lowly, the overlooked, the beloved. Esteban did not move. He remained there, unmoving, a silent sentinel at the threshold of two worlds. His presence was not desperate, not sorrowful in the way humans often mourn. It was serene, accepting, as if he understood more clearly than anyone else in that room that love does not end when the body fails. Love endures quietly, steadfastly beyond the final breath. Outside, the Vatican itself seemed to hold its breath. Even the great bells, so often quick to announce triumphs or tragedies, remained still for a while longer. In the gardens beyond the walls, the olive trees whispered to one another in the rising breeze, as if nature itself bowed its head in reverence. When the end came, it came as softly as a sigh. Pope Francis exhaled once gently and did not inhale again. No fanfare marked his passing, no grand pronouncement, only a deep, encompassing peace settled over the room. The kind of peace that comes when love has been fully given and fully received. Esteban lifted his head and looked into the stillness, his ears pricking forward as if listening for something beyond mortal hearing. For a moment, he simply stood there gazing at the man who had seen him, not as a stray but as a soul. Then, with a slowness heavy with meaning, he lowered himself once more to the floor, laying his head across the Pope's lifeless hand as if vowing with all his being to stay a little longer, to love a little deeper, even though the world had changed forever. And so, as prayers began to murmur through the Vatican halls and mourners prepared their public grief, the greatest farewell of all took place in silence. A man who loved without measure, and a dog who answered that love in the only way love ever truly needs, by refusing to leave. Long before the world bore witness to that silent farewell, long before Esteban became a symbol of undying loyalty, their story had begun quietly, almost invisibly in the forgotten corners of the Vatican gardens. It was there among ancient olive trees and crumbling fountains that a bond took root, not through grandeur or ceremony, but through small persistent acts of presence and grace. Esteban had once been nothing more than a shadow slipping between the marble columns, a creature overlooked and unwanted. His ribs showed through his matted coat, and his movements bore the cautious, broken rhythm of one who had learned that the world often meets vulnerability with cruelty. Most who passed him by saw only a nuisance, an inconvenience to be chased away from the hallowed grounds. But Pope Francis had always seen differently. From the first moment he noticed the shy figure lurking at the edge of the gardens, he recognized something sacred. It was not pity that moved him, nor a fleeting act of charity. It was something deeper, the innate understanding that every living being carries within it a spark of the divine, no matter how battered or bruised its exterior may be. One morning, during one of his early walks before the duties of the day claimed him, Pope Francis approached Esteban not with authority but with humility. He made himself small, kneeling on the stone path, extending an empty open hand. No commands, no coaxing, only an invitation. A silent message: I see you. You are not forgotten. At first Esteban kept his distance, wary and trembling. But day after day the Pope returned. Day after day he knelt. Day after day he left a small offering, a crumb of bread, a whispered prayer, a steady, unwavering presence. Slowly, painfully, the walls of fear that surrounded Esteban began to crack. Trust, that most fragile and precious of gifts, blossomed in the unlikeliest of places. Over time, Esteban came closer, first to snatch a piece of bread, then to linger a moment longer, until one morning, as the bells of St. Peter's tolled far overhead, he simply sat down beside the man who had asked nothing of him but to exist. From that moment on, they belonged to each other, not through ownership, but through quiet mutual recognition. Francis named him Esteban, drawing inspiration from the word Stephanos, meaning crown, not a crown of gold or conquest, but the invisible crown worn by those who endure suffering with silent dignity. Esteban's presence was a daily sermon whispered into the Pope's life, a living reminder that greatness is not found in power or perfection, but in steadfast love offered without demand. The Vatican staff began to notice the bond between them. Gardeners, guards, and clerics, who had once dismissed the stray, now left scraps of food or fresh water tucked beneath the olive trees. Some smiled when they saw Esteban curled faithfully at the Pope's feet during moments of quiet reflection. Others simply bowed their heads, feeling in their bones that something sacred was unfolding in their midst. And so day after day, year after year, through seasons of bloom and decay, Esteban remained, always there, a quiet witness to the prayers, the burdens, the moments of joy and weariness that marked Francis' life. In a world that measures worth by titles and achievements, Esteban offered something purer: love without conditions, presence without expectations, faithfulness without reward. Their story was not one of grand gestures. It was a story written in the soft padding of paws on stone, in the shared silence beneath ancient trees, in the simple miracle of two souls choosing again and again to remain. And in that daily choosing, in that ordinary, extraordinary companionship, a foundation was laid, a foundation strong enough to carry them both into the final, sacred hours when presence, not power, would mean everything. In a world often dazzled by noise and spectacle, the bond between Pope Francis and Esteban stood as a quiet, almost defiant testimony to another way of being. Their story was not built on grandeur declarations or even words. It was built on something older, something more enduring: the sacred power of presence. For Francis, Esteban was never simply a dog. He was not a distraction from the duties of office or a sentimental footnote to a life of faith. Esteban embodied something far more profound: the very heart of the gospel lived out in flesh and fur. In the faithful companionship of an unwanted stray, Francis found a living parable of the love Christ had taught, a love that does not demand, does not control, but simply abides. The Christian faith speaks often of incarnation, the divine choosing to dwell among the ordinary, the broken, the forgotten. Too often that truth is confined to sermons and sacraments locked away within the walls of towering cathedrals, but Pope Francis, in his quiet companionship with Esteban, lived that truth out loud. He understood that true holiness is not found in separation from creation, but in communion with it, in seeing the face of God reflected in the wounded, the lowly, the overlooked. Each time Francis knelt beside Esteban, each time he offered a piece of bread or a silent touch, he enacted a theology that needed no pulpit, no proclamation. It was a theology rooted not in dominance but in tenderness, not in mastery but in mutual trust. He did not seek to change Esteban, to tame him, or to elevate him to some symbol of virtue. He simply made space for him to be wounded, wary, and wholly beloved. Presence over power. It was a lesson the world desperately needed to remember. Leadership in the vision Francis lived was not about ruling from a throne, but about sitting low, shoulder to shoulder with those who suffer. It was about seeing beyond the walls we build the labels, we assign the hierarchies we cling to, and recognizing the sacred in every living being. Esteban's silent, steadfast presence beside the Pope spoke more eloquently than any decree. It whispered of a God who does not force himself upon us, but who waits through our fear, our wounds, our silence, until we dare to trust enough to draw near. In Esteban's slow journey from fear to trust, from distance to closeness, Francis saw the mirror of every soul's journey back to the heart of God. And in the final days, as Francis's body weakened and his voice grew faint, it was not the grandeur of Rome that comforted him. It was not the thrones, nor the councils, nor the ceremonies. It was the simple breathing presence of one small creature who had chosen to stay, who had answered love with love, who bore witness to the truth that when all else falls away, only love remains. In the theology of presence that Francis lived with Esteban, the world was offered a glimpse of Eden, a glimpse of a world healed not by might, but by mercy, not by conquest, but by companionship, not by shouting from a distance, but by kneeling close enough to hear the quiet beating of another heart. As the final twilight descended upon the Vatican, casting long golden shadows across the stone corridors, Esteban remained exactly where he had chosen to be, by the side of the man who had once knelt for him, while the world outside the apostolic palace stirred with the early ripples of mourning inside. In the quiet sanctuary of Pope Francis's modest room, a different kind of farewell was unfolding, one made not of speeches or formal rites, but of simple, silent presence. Esteban did not leave when the prayers grew heavier with grief. He did not retreat when the Pope's breathing grew shallow, when his once strong hand turned cold beneath his muzzle. He stayed still, steady and silent, a living testament to a kind of faithfulness too deep for words. In a world that so often mistakes love for grand gestures, Esteban revealed its truest form, love that lingers in the dark, love that refuses to abandon love, that remains even when hope flickers like a dying flame. Those who entered the room, cardinals, aides, nuns, did so quietly, almost tiptoeing as if afraid to disturb the sacredness they witnessed. They saw a pope nearing the end of his earthly journey, but they also saw something more, a creature forgotten by the world, but not by grace, embodying a loyalty that humbled even the most powerful. The Swiss guards, known for their stoic discipline, stood at attention with glistening eyes. Sister Cecilia, who had seen so much in her life of service, found herself weeping not out of despair but out of awe at the purity of the moment. Even the Vatican doctors, trained in the detached language of medicine and finality, stood back, their hands folded not in professionalism but in reverence. Esteban's vigil was not dramatic. He did not wail or paw or seek attention. He simply stayed, a silent anchor against the tides of loss. Sometimes he would lift his head slightly, sniffing the air as if sensing a presence unseen by human eyes. Sometimes he would nuzzle closer to the bed, as if trying to offer what little warmth his body could still give. Always he remained a steady heartbeat of devotion in a room where so much else was slipping away. Night deepened. The prayers outside grew louder, then softer, then faded into a hush once more. The candles around the Pope's bedside flickered low. Yet Esteban did not sleep. His eyes, dark and glistening, remained fixed on the face of the one who had seen him, named him, loved him. In those eyes burned a watchfulness that no exhaustion could dim. It was a faithfulness that mirrored something ancient, something divine, like the God who stays through all our wanderings, our failures, our forgetting. Esteban remained rooted in love, asking for nothing, offering everything. It was not obedience that held him there, it was the sacred gravity of belonging, the simple shattering knowledge that love, once given, freely creates a bond stronger than death itself. And when at last the first blush of dawn crept through the narrow window, washing the room in pale gold, Esteban was still there, unyielding, unmoving, unwavering. The Pope had crossed the threshold into eternity, but Esteban had not yet let go. His vigil would not end with death for love. True love has never been bound by such small things as endings. It was a final gift, a final sermon, and it was preached not from pulpits or grand balconies, but from the worn body of a stray who understood better than most what it means to stay faithful until the very end. When the world spoke of Pope Francis in the days following his passing, it recounted many things: his humility, his courage, his unwavering call for mercy in a fractured age. Headlines heralded his reforms, his global influence, his theological contributions. Yet somewhere beneath the sweeping analyses and grand memorials, a quieter story began to spread, the story of a dog who stayed. Esteban's silent vigil captured something the grandest eulogies could not: the essence of the gospel lived, not preached, without knowing it, without striving for it. Esteban had become a mirror of the love that Francis had spent a lifetime proclaiming, a love that kneels, that waits, that stays, even when the darkness deepens, a love that refuses to measure worth by usefulness or achievement, but recognizes sacredness in the simple act of presence. Faith without works is dead, the Apostle James wrote centuries ago. In Esteban's simple act of staying, of refusing to leave even when the soul he loved had passed beyond his reach, the living heart of faith was made visible. It was not in eloquence or in might that the gospel was most powerfully revealed, but in silent, stubborn devotion. In a world addicted to noise, to achievement, to constant motion, Esteban's steadfast stillness preached a sermon that shook the heavens. Around the Vatican, those who had witnessed his vigil spoke of it in whispers, as one speaks of miracles, too tender to name the seasoned guards, the aging clerics, the gardeners who had tended the same earth beneath the olive trees for decades, all found themselves moved beyond words. Some wept openly, others simply bowed their heads when passing the spot where Esteban lay, as if recognizing in him something too sacred for casual observation. And beyond the walls, the story traveled. It reached the crowded streets of Buenos Aires, where the young Jorge Bergoglio had once walked among the poor. It reached distant villages and bustling cities alike, carried by a longing woven into every human heart, the longing to be loved without conditions to be accompanied, even to the very threshold of death and beyond. People who had never set foot inside a church. People who struggled to believe in anything beyond what they could see found themselves touched by the simple image of a dying man and a dog who refused to leave him. It was as if the image cut through every defense, every doubt, reaching deep into the place where truth lives, quietly beneath the noise of everyday life. The gospel, so often distorted into spectacle or buried beneath layers of human pride, breathed freely again through Esteban's witness. It spoke in the ancient universal language of love that lingers, of loyalty that costs everything and demands nothing, of a faith that is not loud or performative but woven deep into the marrow of living things. Esteban needed no words, no ceremony, no applause. His very being proclaimed the heart of Christ, the Christ who kneels to wash feet, who weeps at gravesides, who stays awake in lonely gardens while others sleep. In the silence between two beating hearts, one human, one canine, a deeper theology was written not in books, but in the living testament of unwavering love. And so while the Vatican planned its grand ceremonies and the world turned its attention to the weight of legacy, Esteban stayed long after the final rites, long after the final prayers had been spoken. He stayed as a stubborn, sacred echo of the truth. Francis had lived and died for that. When everything else falls away, only love endures. As the days turned into weeks and the grand ceremonies faded into history books, the legacy of Pope Francis remained not merely in the towering speeches or the marble monuments, but in the quiet echoes left in the hearts of those who had witnessed his final, most profound sermon. A sermon not spoken from balconies or read from scrolls, but lived in the humble companionship of a stray dog named Esteban. Across the world, people spoke of the image that refused to leave their minds, a pope, once the most powerful spiritual leader on earth, choosing in his final hours not the company of kings or cardinals, but the faithful, silent presence of a creature the world had long forgotten. It was a testament more powerful than any encyclical. It was a living parable that transcended religion language and borders a story that belonged not only to Catholics, but to all who yearn to believe in a love that does not abandon. In the gardens of the Vatican, Esteban remained a while longer. Long after the procession of dignitaries had come and gone, long after the marble tomb had been sealed, he could often be found lying quietly beneath the olive trees, where he and Francis had once shared countless silent mornings. He asked for nothing. He demanded no place of honor. He simply remained a living monument to the enduring truth that love once given cannot be undone by death. Those who tended the Vatican gardens began to care for him with a tenderness born of reverence. Water bowls appeared beneath the trees, small offerings of bread and fruit were left near his resting place. The Swiss guards, who had once viewed protocol as inviolable, now tipped their hats when passing him, as if acknowledging a silent brother who understood more of the kingdom than many scholars ever would. And beyond the Vatican walls, Esteban's story spread like light, filtering through the cracks of a broken world. In distant villages and crowded cities alike, murals appeared, paintings of a dog at a pope's feet, of a bond that defied every expectation of rank and station. In sermons, in songs, in quiet conversations between strangers, the tale of Pope Francis and Esteban lived on, not as a relic of the past, but as a call to a different way of loving, a different way of living. Pope Francis had spent his life preaching that the church must be a field hospital, a place where wounds are tended, not judged. In Esteban's presence, in his unwavering devotion, the world saw what that looked like distilled into a single, breathtaking truth. To love as Christ loves is to stay when it is easiest to leave, to kneel when it is tempting to stand above, to embrace when the world turns away. In the end, it was not the gold of crowns or the thunder of crowds that testified most truly to the life of Pope Francis. It was the quiet, persistent love of one small, wounded creature who had found his place beside a man who believed truly, stubbornly, beautifully that every life matters. And so the legacy left behind was not simply a legacy of leadership or reform. It was a legacy of presence, a legacy of seeing the unseen, of loving the unloved, of choosing again and again the sacred over the spectacular. It was a legacy that lived on not in monuments of stone, but in beating hearts made tender by the memory of a pope and a dog, and the gospel they preached without ever needing to speak. In every quiet garden, in every act of mercy, unseen by the world, in every soul that chooses to stay beside the broken and forgotten, their story still breathes a testament to the simple, unshakable truth that love faithful to the end is the greatest legacy a life can leave.